first off, welcome. So we're here to talk about Gen AI, specifically about collaboration in Gen AI, right? So it was almost a year ago today. AI broke onto the scene and it came on very aggressively. It's like the cool uncle at a party. You're like, Uncle Bob's here. This is the best party ever. And like 2 days later, Uncle Bob turned into the drunk uncle that nobody wants at the party. You're like, Uncle Bob is dangerous. What are we going to do? We got to get him out of here. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about a little bit, right? So really quick, have my panelists introduce themselves. Let's kick it off. First off here to Shen.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you. My name's Sean Litton. I'm with the Tech Coalition. The Tech Coalition is an alliance of 40 tech companies, varying sizes, capacities, different types of services, who've all come together to share their experience, their expertise, their advances in technology to help one another do better on the issue of protecting children from online child sexual exploitation.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Rebecca Portnoff. I'm Vice President of Data Science at Thorn. Thorn is a nonprofit that builds technology to defend children from sexual abuse. Our technology and services are deployed across the child safety ecosystem with fellow nonprofits, tech companies, and directly integrated into platforms for law enforcement. I'll pass it to Afrooz.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Afrooz Kaviani Johnson. I work for UNICEF, which is the United Nations Specialised Agency for Children. I'm a global technical lead on programming to prevent and respond to all forms of online violence against children. So that means I support our global partnerships and policy advocacy, as well as our country teams all over the world who are doing a lot of work in amending laws, supporting the law reform, policy development, building capacity of frontline law enforcement and social services and their response, educative interventions with children and families, as well as various industry collaborations. It's a pleasure to be here.
And my name is Juliet Shen. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently affiliated with Columbia University's Open Source Trust and Safety Tooling Hub. I'm also working with the Integrity Institute, which is a collective, nonprofit think tank around trust and safety and professionals. My career has been in trust and safety product. I was most recently product lead at Google, leading spam and abuse and scaled abuse on Google Workspace. Before that, I was the director of trust and safety product at Grindr. And before that, I spent 5 years at Snapchat as their first trust and safety product manager, building out a lot of the child safety protections, internal tools, and I'm now rambling. So I'll hand this back to Matt.
No, all good thing, and that's where the focus. If you look at our panel here, we talk a lot about the ecosystem of trust and safety, right? And that's what we really want to emphasize, the collaboration to prevent online exploitation. Very heavy emphasis on the word prevent. And we see a range of professionals in the industry, from law enforcement, boots on the ground, research, computer science, to industry orgs specifically dedicated to reducing CSAM content online. So as we dive in, one of the biggest shifts we've seen with young people in online spaces is a shift from focusing heavily on we need to protect children versus how can we also empower and educate. So first question, kind of kicking over to Afrooz, thinking about from a child rights framework, how can we sort of approach online safety, child safety in this landscape?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great place to start. And obviously, if we're speaking about children's rights, we need to talk about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with it. And of course, children have all human rights, general human rights, but the convention recognises that they also have special rights because of their unique status in childhood. And I think the convention is particularly important for a few reasons. Number one, it really shifts the paradigm. So it's not just that charity lens or looking at children as objects of protection, but really as individuals with rights. Secondly, it is the most ratified human rights treaty in the world. So it really provides a universally, nearly universally accepted framework. And also it calls for children's participation in decisions that affect them. So this is also quite unique because I guess traditionally in terms of tech development, children haven't had, that much of a say. So this is critical, also thinking of children not only as a homogenous group, but in all their individual kind of capacities, be they environmental or personal factors. So I'll close out with just one other point that, like you mentioned, the convention does have a broad range of rights. So obviously their right to protection from abuse and exploitation, but also privacy rights, access to information, freedom of expression, rights to education, and so on. And what's critical about the convention is that it says that all these rights are interdependent. They're all mutually supportive. So we need to look at this holistically whenever we're, thinking about the impacts of technology on children.
Right, to that point, balancing policy decisions, enforcements, and tooling to kind of keep those rights in mind is crucial to that. Kind of stepping a bit beyond and broadening the conversation, with our experts here is thinking about, why is this collaboration important, right? Why is it so crucial to reducing the amount of CSAM and exploitation happening in platforms? Juliet, we'll kind of start for you. The case for the work as someone who's worked in product for as many years as you have. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I'm extremely grateful and honored to be on this panel is because I've actually interacted with all four of these organizations through this product work. A lot of this includes kind of what we call safety by design, and that really, it's critical not only to have that external kind of expertise and that point of view. So all four of these organizations have definitely kind of influenced product design, user experience, system architecture, things around, even data retention or like how we operate and design workflows. And I think it's also important to kind of have these internal experts as well. So these might be your policy team members at tech companies. These might be your legal folks. These might be trust and safety operational folks. But they can kind of act as the proxy to kind of additionally advocate internally for the kind of like expertise and recommendations and proposals from these kind of like advocacy civil society groups. Because if anyone here works inside of a tech company, you may know that the teams don't talk to each other that well most of the time. And especially when you're a safety team and you're trying to convince another product feature team to change their design. One thing that I've seen work very well is doing that early and on in that design process to show if you're gonna build a holistic, top quality, premier product, doesn't that also mean accounting for some of these safety features? And so I do want to shout out, the recent principles around generative AI and child safety that Thorn, All Tech and Human, and many others kind of contributed to and launched recently. Those principles are definitely going to be mentioned in some of these design meetings, trying to figure out how do we incorporate things like this. Looking at the UN Convention of the Children's Rights, during my time at Snap and at Grindr, we definitely incorporated those kinds of tips into how we thought about features like user reporting, into things like how do we make sure we're not accidentally building dark patterns or design choices that may lead to actions that aren't really responsible for the person taking that action. So the importance of collaboration is so near to my heart because it definitely impacts the user experience that we all experience each day.
Well, I love how you jump on some of those broader framework thinkings, right? Like taking what already exists and using that to shape and inform decisions and policies and all the tooling that goes forward. So I think that's a great call out, knowing particularly as we approach these issues, how platforms think about it. Strategically, how we work with our partners in order to get informed and how to respond to that. And Sean, I know talking about some of the broader industry efforts, Tech Coalition.
Really quickly, before Sean goes in, this actually lays in. So part of that safety by design is not only the design and user experience, but also integrations to make sure that things are interoperable. So one of the great things that Tech Coalition has done, and I'll see it over to Sean shortly, is provide these platforms for industry platforms to kind of share intel in a secure and privacy-centric way.
Why, thank you. So what Juliet's referencing something called Lantern, which I'll talk about in a second. I think for me, with collaboration, it takes time and energy to collaborate, right? And so I think the collaboration has to be driven towards really specific outcomes that have an impact. Otherwise, people will walk away from it. And so at the Tech Coalition, we're trying to facilitate industry collaboration that actually has an impact on their individual platforms, their individual companies, their individual products, as well as the entire ecosystem. So it starts with facilitating the companies talking to each other. So no single company is going to solve the problem of CSAM or online child sexual exploitation and abuse. So coming together to share their learnings, their best practices, coming together in small working groups to talk about things like investigations, reporting, age assurance, Gen AI, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then also industry then needs to collaborate with external stakeholders, because industry is only one of the stakeholders, and industry alone will not solve this problem. And so we also drive collaboration between industry and governments, regulators, law enforcement, civil society. So for example, we've collaborated with Thorn on a grooming classifier. We collaborated with Thorn and NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, on a video hashing translator project that Juliet was in charge of our tech innovation working group at that time. That same working group, and this is made up of members from these different companies, came up with something called Lantern, which is a signal sharing product that allows companies who are members of this, and any company is eligible, it's free of charge to participate, to share signals about bad actors and other incidences of online child sexual exploitation abuse on their platform, so that other platforms who may not be aware that those same actors are active on their platforms, or that URL links to something on their platform, have that information. So the collaboration has to drive to real outcomes, and otherwise people won't continue with it. And so that's what we're just trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of add to that, Rebecca, kicking over to you and Thorn, we talked about this collaboration. I know Thorn has worked with quite a few different stakeholders in terms of looking at this.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think the one thought I'll layer on to what my fellow panelists here are saying is this concept of collaborative development and community action together having real impact. That absolutely applies specifically in the technology development space itself. So I lead the data science team at Thorn. We're the team that builds our machine learning AI solutions to help accelerate victim identification, to stop re-victimization, that's the viral spread of child sexual abuse material, and then to prevent abuse from happening in the first place. And my team personally has really benefited from the rich open source ecosystem that exists in ML and AI, where we are able to build off of architectures that have been open sourced by much larger teams than ours to be able to use those in an impactful way for our particular mission. Because as Shen noted, at the end of the day, none of this is really worth it unless we're seeing that tangible impact on the ground.
No, I love that. And thinking about one of the conversations I get a lot from trust and safety is just like, oh, this is a US-centric, or this is Western. But we know this is very much a global effort. Afrooz, I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit and how we're approaching this on a global scale.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, the domestic work happening here is really incredible, but it is also critical to bring on board the globe, given the nature of the issue. And there are already some great coalitions that are doing this work, such as the We Protect Global Alliance, which brings together governments. I think it's currently 103 governments that have signed up to this, tech companies, civil society, and international organisations like UNICEF to really share information, knowledge, collaborate on this issue. And I think picking up on what Shen mentioned, We Protect promotes a model, a response framework which really recognises that tech solutions alone are not going to tackle this issue, in its entirety. It is a whole of society response. We need prevention measures at scale. We need victim and survivor-centred, criminal justice and support services. So that's a model that We Protect promotes, and a lot of members of that coalition are really working towards that.
No, and I love that. When we think about collaboration, whether it's victim support, signal sharing, resources, education. One of the things we referenced earlier is like Gen AI is the hot topic, right? The technology is a hot topic, and while not a silver bullet solution, it definitely provides some opportunities to detect harmful content and bad character and behavior. So speaking about the tech, what is the added layer of difficulty that Gen AI adds to these efforts? So Juliet, we'll kind of kick it to you, and then Rebecca will kind of come back to you after that.
Yeah, so it's definitely something that keeps me up at night. I think that one of the things that stresses me out in terms of Gen AI's impact on child safety and our existing ability to kind of defend against that is that our existing tech, our existing workflows, our existing integrations are simply not designed for this kind of new type of harm. One of the things that was already a challenge in the child safety and CSAM detection space was novel CSAM, or unknown CSAM abuse materials that are not yet logged in any database. So when we're looking for those digital fingerprints, we don't know that it exists because it hasn't been fingerprinted. Gen AI kind of scales that considerably. Not only can people kind of create novel CSAM, they could take existing CSAM and adjust it as well, thus making it novel as well. So there's a lot of challenges, but one thing that does kind of give me some hope for this future is that, as kind of Rebecca mentioned, I think that we're really seeing this convergence of the AI ethics, responsible tech, AI responsibility, ML communities with traditional trust and safety. That's not necessarily a relationship that was very, very strong or established before kind of this new rise of Gen AI, but it is something that I'm seeing rapidly grow. So I'm confident that with these bright minds and these wonderful resources and organizations, we can rise to the challenge and adapt our workflows, our tech, to meet this new challenge.
I think to answer this question, Matt, I'm going to go back to that framework that I shared earlier, those key verticals of victim identification, re-victimization, and prevention, because to me, the impact of the misuse of generative AI really reverberates across all three of these key verticals. So for the first one, I think it's important to know sort of the baseline statistic that we're dealing with. So if you look at NCMEC's 2023 report, NCMEC is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They are the clearinghouse for reports of this kind of abuse material and other abuse material in the United States. In 2023, they received over 100 million files of suspected child sexual abuse material in reports from that year. So this is just an obscenely huge number of files that they need to then prioritize and triage and send to the appropriate law enforcement ICAC in order to be able to do that critical work of victim identification. And now enter generative AI, where you have technologies that can produce photorealistic AIG CSAM, AI-generated child sexual abuse material at scale. These models are being misused today to create this kind of content. You can make thousands of photos in minutes. So anything that adds to that existing baseline statistic, that haystack of content, especially photorealistic material that can be difficult to ascertain whether or not it's been AI generated or AI manipulated, that's going to be a problem for frontline defenders doing that victim ID work. The second vertical is around re-victimization, and Juliet referenced this in her comments here, and I'll just give a content warning. We are already observing that bad actors are fine-tuning broadly shared and open source models with child sexual abuse material in order to then create models that are now able to make bespoke, targeted content of these same children. So this is just re-victimization to the next level. You have kids who have experienced this kind of abuse, who have been terribly betrayed in this way, who have seen their content, that abuse then get documented and shared, and are now seeing it used to make more abusive material. It's really horrific. The final point that I'll make on prevention is this sense of, or this reality that bad actors are misusing these kinds of technologies to broaden the pool of available victims to them. So just to ground it in a particular example, I think many of us here know that sexual extortion is tragically a trend that is on the rise, that this is something that is particularly impacting young boys that in some cases experience this and then feel that they have no choice but to end their lives in response to some of the terrible pressure and stress that they experience as part of this. There are reports and growing reports of bad actors using generative AI, nudifying and sexualizing apps to take benign imagery of children and then sexualize this content. So now these bad actors can just skip the step of having to actually solicit this material from the children directly and can just generate it themselves and then follow that same financial sextortion flow. So I know that's all a huge downer to hear, and so I do want to end on a note of hope, because I firmly believe that while all of this misuse absolutely deserves our attention, that we do still have a window of opportunity here to act, and that belief is grounded in data. Since August of 2022, Thorn has been tracking the prevalence of AI-generated child sexual abuse material in communities that are dedicated to child sexual abuse. We published some of our findings with the Stanford Internet Observatory last June, and what we've been consistently observing month over month is, yes, the prevalence of this content, AIGC-SAM, is growing, but it's still small. It's still small in comparison to the broader pool of the data. And so to me, that means that we have such a rare and exciting opportunity to act into this moment, to prevent the misuse of this technology while it's still emerging, to build it in a way that we are prioritizing child safety.
Can I jump in really quick? So I'll preface this by saying I know nothing about blockchain, I know nothing about NFTs, but when the idea first came out, I was really excited because I thought maybe NFTs could be the way that people can really own their digital likeness and potentially use that as a marker to say, hey, it's being used without my consent in this way. Again, don't know anything about this space, but if you do, would love to hear more about that. Something else I also wanted to call out too, a lot of our conversation on this panel so far, especially on the harms of Gen AI introducing, is focused on the content. But I also want to raise that, I think when there's a new technology in the space, you can kind of guess that fraudsters are going to be the first to utilize it and utilize it at scale. So you can see that this is probably something that is happening in the child safety, child abuse space, but hasn't quite caught on yet. But basically, if you had these kind of scaled international networks that are running these kind of, whether it's grooming, enticement, sextortion, the kind of telltale signs around the language that they use is also going to change. We're going to be losing some major linguistic clues because people can then use large language models, LLMs, to write everything in a very generic, neutral voice, and then also come up with dozens or hundreds of customized versions of that message. So I also want to make sure that we're thinking about kind of the messaging and grooming aspect as well as the content harms of Gen AI.
No, I think those are some great points, and particularly to kind of what you shared. Part of trust and safety is we get to have these conversations, right? And the fact that we have these is such a huge value, because how do you deal with something that is conceivably the worst of the worst on the web without not only confronting the content, the methods, and the way bad actors are perpetrating these crimes in order to find solutions? And they're constantly changing tactics, right? And having to adjust on that. And what is the signal we're getting to identify what those problems are? That said, it's not all bad stuff. Right? So how can we, thinking about proactively, right? We've done some really good work, but thinking about proactively solutions that are making an impact. I know, Rebecca, we'll kind of start with you on this one in terms of what's being done in order to mitigate and limit this amount of harmful content.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that, and you'll have to cut me off if I go for too long, because I'm going to try to summarize the last year of my life. I have more gray hair than I did at the beginning of last year. So for the last year, starting in around, I think it was last May or June, with All Tech is Human, we've been leading an initiative with many of the leading generative AI companies to collaboratively define, align on, and then commit to a set of safety by design principles and associated mitigations to enact those principles. So the goal of this project from Thorn and All Tech is Human's perspective was to really meet this moment, to not miss out on this window of opportunity. And so we wanted to focus on those organizations that we believe have both the opportunity and the responsibility to be acting into this moment. And so we prioritized working with folks who are developing this kind of generative AI technology, who were distributing the generative AI technology, acting as model hosters, either for third-party models or for their own first-party models. And then as the conversation grew, realizing the critical role that search engines and social media platforms and data hosting platforms, that all of these play in the distribution of the underlying models themselves. So the paper is 50 pages long. I don't expect everyone to read every word of it, but just to give you a sense of the high-level goals here, we've put together a set of mitigations and principles that we believe, if acted on, will first make these models less capable of producing this kind of abuse material, specifically AIGC-SAM and other, to Juliet's point, other text-related harms of child sexual abuse. Secondly, we'll make it possible to more reliably detect the abuse material that then get produced by these models, and that speaks directly to my earlier point on victim identification and how difficult that kind of job is and the effect that generative AI can have on it. So making those frontline defenders' jobs easier to more reliably detect this kind of content. And then finally, to limit the control, or to limit the distribution of the underlying models and apps and services that are being used to produce this kind of content. Because at the end of the day, I don't believe there's any legitimate reason why a model that has been fine-tuned on CSAM should be hosted on a third-party model hosting platform. You should take those down. You can assess the models before they have been hosted to understand what they are capable of doing, and then incorporate mitigations before you do that. Nudifying and sexualizing apps are being misused, not just by bad actors, but also by minors to bully and harass their peers. And so to me, as a society, we can decide, hey, these are not legitimate uses of these technologies. These are not legitimate models that have been built, and we can take them down and act as that choke point in the ecosystem.
No, that's really a great point. Thinking about the principles, I think is like the second to last page has a lot of the check marks and steps that you can take. Thinking more broader across the industry, Gen AI or other industry efforts to reduce this. Sean, if you can add, what are some of the additional efforts that are taking place?
Yeah, so I agree with Rebecca that we are at a moment of opportunity and there is hope. Earlier last year, companies within the Tech Coalition formed several working groups around Gen AI. The first one was focused on platform safety, and we have many of our members have large Gen AI platforms. And coming together and sort of doing a collective risk assessment and then figuring out the right mitigations. And you can understand the advantage of doing that collectively rather than doing it individually, so that they can each share what they're learning, what they're seeing, and then they can take advantage of other people's knowledge to make sure that their platform is safer. So first one is, that's all safety by design. And then the second working group was looking at the downstream, because obviously we don't control all the models, right? And so some of these, as you said, bespoke models will be producing Gen AI CSAM. How can that be appropriately detected? How is it going to be reported? And what is the right way to address that within current work streams? And so helping companies with policies, et cetera, to deal with that. And then the last group was actually the first time we had a group of lawyers form their own working group just to talk about the legal issues. And that was incredibly important because like one of the things that came out of that working group is how do we pressure test these models? Because if you pressure test it, it may actually produce CSAM, which would be a felony. And so how can we create a safe harbor? So we've been facilitating a conversation with the Department of Justice, and they've agreed on a way forward for companies to pressure test here in the United States their models and ensure they're safe. So those are just some examples. And then lastly, the collaboration has gone beyond industry. So we had a briefing with key U.S. stakeholders, law enforcement, regulators, et cetera, and other civil society stakeholders. And then last week I was in London doing the very same thing with people in the UK. And again, this is to understand what they're seeing, to talk about how we can work together, the problems that they're having that we can't figure them out alone, like the red teaming issue, like working with NCMEC on a reporting template, et cetera. So we have to work together.
No, I think that's a great point. Like one of the consistent things I've learned in my life when you have a problem to solve is you create a process and procedure, and then if you can make that consistent across the board, I love the shift involving law enforcement. We saw the Stanford Observatory report about a week ago talk about just gaps in the system, whether it's reporting, requesting information, reporting information that really limits our ability to take action holistically. And so those are all great actions to understand how we can make a positive impact. Kind of as we wrap up here, back to the group, you're all here. Maybe this is something you care about. Hopefully you all care about it. But how can folks get involved in either supporting this work, learning more about this work, or getting connected to it? So Rebecca, we'll kind of start with you and Thorn.
Sure, I definitely encourage everyone to check out our website, thorn.org. We've got an issue landing page that I think does a really nice job of providing that background and context into some of the history of this issue and also the things that Thorn is doing in collaboration with many of the folks here and the broader child safety ecosystem. We also do offer products and services to help support platforms and law enforcement in their work. And so if you're looking for someone who needs a CSAM detection solution, come talk to me. I'm happy to help engage on that.
Awesome. Afrooz?
Yeah, I think I'd highlight two things from UNICEF's side. Firstly, I think that point about understanding the global picture and what children are experiencing beyond the US. So we actually have some research which we've undertaken in 12 low and middle income countries so far about children's experiences of online child sexual abuse and exploitation. And there's ongoing research now in a further 11 countries. So you can find that on our Office of Research website, and I think really important to bear in mind in terms of countries that are sometimes thought of as at early stages of digital adoption, but still up to 20% of children, internet using children, saying they had experienced some form of online child abuse and exploitation in the past year. So I think that's important to bear in mind. And then number two, just to make a plug, if I may, for a current project we have to develop guidance and tools for companies around conducting child rights impact assessments. So for those of you who may not be familiar, these are assessments that can be undertaken at the product level, at the service level, or more at a policy or operational level to really understand how business activities are impacting children's rights, bearing in mind, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So that's something to watch this space for, and I think it's really a process and a methodology that can help move from the more reactive to the proactive safety by design approach. Thanks.
Yeah, Sean?
Yeah, well, thank you all for listening. And I would just say, if you work for a company and you want to get involved in these forms of collaboration, we'd love to talk to you about that. The Tech Coalition is a membership organization, but we can make that as easy as possible. And then the second thing is this other Lantern, this signal sharing platform is open to all industry. It's industry only, but if you are part of a platform, we'd love to talk to you about how you can take advantage of these signals and use them to ensure that your platform is safe.
I'm going to just piggyback off of that because I forgot one thing. I'm sorry. If you go to thorn.org, you'll also see the blog that covers Thorn and All Tech as Humans' work on the safety by design principles for generative AI in particular. We have a very wide open door for more companies to join into the commitments. This is something that I would personally love to see. So if your org isn't already on the list of 10 folks who have committed to it, please come talk to me. Please come check out the website. I'd love to have a conversation.
So right now I'm in the spirit of collaboration, I think that I will make a plug for the open source work that we're doing. So we're doing a large research initiative to take a mapping of what tools exist out there, whether they're paid services or they're open source. What is the current state of them? How do we kind of reinvigorate them? I believe very strongly that open source is the future of trust and safety, especially when it comes to tools. I think that we've learned and kind of spoken at length about how collaboration really helps us avoid reinventing the same circles, learning from one another's experiences to build better experiences for children online. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, or Threads. I have left X, but you can find me just under Juliet Shen.
No, I love it. Biggest takeaway from that, there are a lot of ways to get engaged in this topic. There definitely is not a reason that platforms can't do something to mitigate or limit the amount of CCM content that's out there. Please join me in thanking Sean Litton, Dr. Rebecca Portnoff, Afrooz Johnson, and Juliet Shen. Thank you very much.